Good afternoon. And on behalf of Red Cloud, I'd like to welcome all of the 1,600 plus registered attendees to our Day 2 keynote presentation for our Pre-PDAC 2022. I'd especially like to thank Ross Beaty, who most moderators simply add the word legends to introduce him. But I'll take a quick moment here to give a little better description of who we have on here today. Ross is a geologist and a resource company entrepreneur with over 46 years of experience in the international minerals and renewable energy industry. Founder, chairman of Pan American Silver, Equinox. Ross Beaty is president of the Sitka Foundation, one of Canada's leading environmental groups, and the patron of the Beaty Biodiversity Center at UBC. He's also a director of a number of NGOs, including Panthera, the BC Parks Foundation, and Pacific Foundation. Today's keynote will take the form of a 45-minute fireside chat. I'd like to remind viewers that at any time during the live presentation, please submit a question and we'll do our very best to get to as many as possible. So let's begin. Ross, thanks very much for having you. I think to have you on our chat today and not ask you about gold would be crazy. So after what some participants would suggest was a disappointing 2021, we really like to know what your, gold's acting much better recently. What's your outlook here?
Well, thank you very much, Bruce, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for the honor of speaking today. I happen to be located, I think the last time I did this, I was at a mine of Equinox's in southern Mexico. And this time I'm at a mine of Equinox's in Brazil. I flew down here yesterday from a conference in Florida, then came in here this morning. It's about 4 hours inland from the Atlantic Ocean, and went underground this morning, and I just came out from underground and had lunch, and here I am. So I mean, I'm at a gold mine, the kind of place that makes this all happen and supplies the world with money, at least a different kind of money. I mean, real money. So your question is, was I disappointed in gold's action in 2021? And to some degree I was, yes, I cannot deny it. I expected, with all of the kind of perfect storm happening in support of gold, such as higher inflation, stress on the dollar, peaking out of the major markets by the end of the year, and on, and all of the liquidity that has been juiced into world markets through COVID and even before. I actually expected gold would do a little bit better, but it didn't do badly. I'm going to say it didn't do badly, and I think one of the reasons for the underperformance relative to my expectations is that the major markets, we're still on a tear. Major markets were up 20% last year on average. The S&P was up 20%. And why would people invest in almost anything when, a 10-year-old can invest in an ETF based on major markets and make 20% on their money? So I just think that particular party is over. And so I'm extremely optimistic about gold prices going forward, even without this noise and chaos that's happening in Ukraine. Take away geopolitics, the macro market for gold is just absolutely fabulous. And so I expect, independent of the geopolitical world, I think gold should blow through its previous high of $2,000 and end the year somewhere higher.
Okay. Ross, one other question that seems to have, it's sort of like a function of this cycle or the newer world in large gold production or in large gold companies, is it seems like the institutional and major shareholders of big companies today, like your Equinox, are really pushing for, rather than growth and reserve growth and finding new ore bodies, they're really pushing towards dividends, share buybacks, conservative capital allocation. And the question is if you got large investors pushing senior companies that way, and you've got a marketplace which is ignoring the junior companies, which is really only doing most of the exploration work out there on behalf of capital markets, it really seems like there needs to be a greater focus on those junior companies. But I'll let you comment.
You're right, actually, Bruce. I mean, I've obviously I've been through many cycles. It is a cyclical industry, and of course, when the gold price goes down, the gold mining companies don't do too well. Of course, their margins shrink, and sometimes they lose money. They can't pay off their debt, and the stocks crater. And of course, when that happens, investors blame the companies for bad allocation of resources, bad capital decisions, bad acquisitions, you name it. When the gold price goes up and these companies do well, investors think they're all geniuses. So really, you have to put in context gold share performance with the gold price attached to that performance. And I think a lot of companies are mistakenly driven by kind of investor views. Let's remember, investors tend to take very short-term views. If you're building a company, you have to take a long-term view. So you can't just do what investors want you to do, which is today, have capital returns, dividends, share buybacks, and that kind of thing. In an environment where every mining company, every single day, eats its future. It's a non-renewable resource. Companies that don't replace reserves will go to zero eventually. So to avoid that, they have to make acquisitions. They have to do a lot of exploration. They have to replace reserves and so on. And you've got to allocate some money to exploration and potentially acquisitions. And I think the smart companies are doing that, and maybe the more short-term driven companies are not doing that. The big problem today is that the investing world is much reduced from what it was a few years ago. There just isn't as much money looking for investments in gold equities as there used to be. A lot of that money has gone into other investment areas. Mostly it's gone into the stock market, general market, which has done so well for so many years. It's gone straight up for what, 12 or 13 years now, since 2009. And why would people buy anything else as long as that happens? Well, I think that, as I said earlier, I think that party's over. The bond market, why anybody would invest in bonds now, most of which are getting negative rates, real rates, is beyond me. You have a real world inflationary world, and you've seen wobbles in major markets. You've seen wobbles in cryptocurrencies. This insanity for the meme stocks and a lot of the non-fungible tokens, which drew a lot of money into those last year. I think that party's over as well. The result of that is that people are looking more at gold and more at gold mining equities. And if they want to really get big capital gains, they have to look at the juniors, because the juniors today are going to be they're creating the mines of the future. Juniors are always the feeder for major companies. And the successful juniors, I mean, there was a takeout this week on Monday of a company called Orca Gold by a large Australian company, 88% premium. That's pretty nice. That's the kind of thing I look for when I'm invested in juniors. And as the market for juniors in terms of funding gets smaller and smaller, the way it has done for the last number of years, it's going to be harder for those juniors to go out and make those discoveries, drill off those deposits that the majors are going to go out and buy. The result of that will be eventually a very, very limited world of opportunities for majors, and those few companies that are working today in that business will be worth more and more and more due to scarcity. So that's why those kind of companies today represent fabulous buys for investors today. They're unloved, they're well managed by and large, there's smart people running them, there's a handful of them, and those ones are the ones that are going to outperform exactly the way Orca Gold did. All of a sudden it was worth, one day it was worth 50 cents, another day it was worth 90 cents overnight.
Yeah, so listen, I have a couple of questions on the line here. I figure we'll talk gold through and then we'll move over to sort of other commodities. This is a little bit more of a technical question that just came on to the call. I'll leave it with you whether you want to talk about it or not. Is the structure of price discovery in the precious metal markets, mainly the LBMA and COMEX, no longer fit, or are you happy with what it is? I think he's specifically talking about the layers of derivatives that find themselves into the actual gold trading market.
Yeah, I can't speak to that too much. I don't play derivatives. I'm basically a fundamental guy buying and building gold companies, exploration companies like Lumina Gold, and mining companies like Equinox Gold. I watch the derivatives market. It's very, very important to the gold business. But at the end of the day, it's fundamental demand and fundamental supply that govern price action over the long term, over even the medium term. In the interim, you have short term, you have lots and lots of noise. Traders get involved. Right now, we're seeing quite an interesting little whipsaw between European traders and North American traders. Europeans are going long, North American traders are going short. That happens, but it's a short-term bit of noise. I believe fundamentals always trump short-term noise in the end.
Thanks, Ross. And just one last thing, there is some production. We saw the announcements out of Kinross yesterday on their Russian production, but there is production that comes obviously out of both Russia and its neighboring STAN sort of countries. Do you think that might have a supply impact overall on the market going forward here in the gold space?
Again, this Ukrainian situation is a short-term noise. It's not something I would play the gold price on particularly. For sure, there will be a supply reaction. My gut feeling is Russian gold there's a lot of gold in Russia, a lot of big gold mining companies. They will be more capital constrained. They will have harder time accessing capital, but they will want gold because the ruble is getting hammered. Gold is real value because it's denominated in US dollars typically, and it's a hedge against ruble collapse. So there will be more and more people mining gold in Russia. And you have to remember, gold is highly, highly liquid. It can be transported dead easily in a person's body. It can be transported in a helicopter. So the gold mining industry in Russia is deep, and I don't believe long-term it will be significantly affected. Certainly short-term it is right now. But Kinross's mine, it's such a tragedy. It's Kinross is a tremendous company. I know the senior management of Kinross. It's a great company, well run. And Kupol is an amazing gold mine. So the worst outcome here is if a solid, ethical, great company like Kinross loses that mine to an unethical bunch of bandits or thugs in Russia who steal it from them and then produce gold the way Kinross is doing. That would be the worst outcome possible, but it's not impossible. Long term, I don't see a big change coming from Russia on the supply side.
Okay. And one other good question here, I mean, it applies to gold, but it applies to other commodities as well. Is there any new geologic technologies or technological revolution things happening in mining that are helping making exploration more accurate or in dollars invested more useful?
No, I would say no. There's lots of technology on the fringe of the business. In the mining game, incremental improvements in milling technology, a little bit of new science, using Internet of Things to make things happen more easily. In the exploration world, there's tons of things, geophysical things, geochemical things on the edge, better mapping, better GPS. But on the whole, it's a basic industry. You get a nice area, you drill the heck out of it. That hasn't changed. You develop a resource, you cross your fingers, you do your economic study, you build a mine, and then you cross your fingers it's going to run like it's supposed to run. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It's a risky game, and the world is littered with unsuccessful investments in this business. But the ones that are successful usually turn out pretty well. So I would say it's an old industry. It hasn't changed a huge amount, but for incremental improvements on the edge, the result today is, to me, as a geologist and not an engineer, it's a near miracle. It's truly black magic how good the engineering and the scientists are able to take, in a ton of rock, in a big, huge ton of rock, extract 90% of the gold that's in that rock, which is really a couple of sand grains in a ton of rock, and they're able to get 90% of that out of it. It's absolutely amazing. But
it's remarkable.
It's remarkable. But I feel like the technology really hasn't changed that much over the years.
Okay. No, I just thought that was a good question, because we've seen in other industries like the oil industry, horizontal multi-frac drilling changed the whole game in both gas and oil. So good to know that.
For sure.
Okay. Well, look, I think that's it for now on gold. I was gonna move over to the base metals, and let's talk a little bit about the supply side. After a very long bear market, I think the peak of the last cycle was 2011. A lot of the base metals, whether they're copper, nickel, zinc, etc., have had really very little money invested in them in the last decade, and subsequently we haven't had much in the way of new big incremental production coming on in those markets. And just wondering how the setup looks, in history, I remember other cycles, you come out of a recession and it's years before, the base metal prices get going because they're working off the excess of the previous cycle's investments in new supply. And this time it really seems like we're thin. We're just coming out of a COVID recession here. And it's remarkable to me how backwardated and how tight most of the metal markets are. So I just wondered from a supply, because it's about 8-10 years getting a new mine on. Supply looks extremely
15 or 20 years, 15
right?
or 20 years. It takes forever to build a mine.
So just your sort of view on where we are. They tend to be big, long supply cycles up and down, and it really seems like things are tight.
Sure. I mean, mining is cyclical, right? It's cyclical. Why is it cyclical? Because bear markets beget bear markets. As the price goes down, people don't make money. They don't invest in it. It goes down further. Major markets crater. We go into recessions, and then recessions bottom. They pick up, and it's happy days for a while. Within that basic cyclical world, you have these super trends. You had an amazing trend from 2002 to 2008 when the world financial crisis ended, but actually it kind of continued to about 2011 with that little wobble in 2008, 2009. That was a super cycle, and it was driven by a true secular change in the world's biggest country. It was China industrializing and urbanizing, and that drove absolutely staggering investment in infrastructure. So that drove pretty well all metals, and it was amazing. It was iron ore, coal, copper, zinc, you name it. It was just incredible. That party kind of ended around 2011, 2012, when China said, you know what, we've done enough infrastructure building, we've done enough of that macro stuff. Let's go and work on services. Let's work on getting Chinese people more engaged in the services industry and things that are internal in China that don't consume as many metals. And so they did that, and that reduced the demand for a lot of metals right through to about 2017, 2018. But what was happening in the background was that, you're right, companies stopped exploring, they stopped building mines, permitting got more difficult, ever more difficult, as it continues to be today. Social license is more difficult to obtain today, and that affects the supply of new metal to the markets. The other macro factor that is in the background is this amazing, true secular change in the carbon reduction movement, this decarbonization movement. So that's driving staggering demand for things like copper, nickel, aluminum, manganese, magnesium, cobalt, lithium, silver. I could go on and on. Those are metals that are needed in this monster change of electrifying our world and getting it off fossil fuels. It's happening in every country, every company, every government, and it's leading to this amazing new demand for all of these basic materials that the world needs to execute this decarbonization plan. It's being done because, of course, the reality is, puking all that CO2 into the air is actually affecting the world. It's affecting the world's climate, and thus it's affecting the world's people. So that is the reason it's been accepted by every country in the world. There's no debate anymore. People are into the action world, and guess what? That action requires metals. And it's amazing to me that more of the average person or average government or average municipality who is involved in permitting new things doesn't make that connection between the need for a copper mine and the need for batteries and plugins and everything else, and electric cars and generation and transmission and use of electricity as we electrify the world. I mean, it's almost a self-defeating situation. If people don't allow mines to happen, they're not going to have enough copper and cobalt, nickel, everything else to get to that decarbonized world. Because what you're seeing today, and of course, this madman in Russia, what he's doing is he's just throwing gasoline on the fire. And because Russia and Ukraine are large producers of basic metals, both basic metals and also agricultural products. So that's just, as I said, that's just putting gasoline on the fire. Even without that happening, you've still got a profoundly bullish environment for all of those basic battery metals or electricity metals. and there's not enough of it in the world. And so you're going to see, I think, what you saw in China in the 2000s. You're going to see these markets staying higher for longer. Eventually, there's going to be a correction. We all know that, but it's not in any. As long as we keep this electrification transition happening, it's going to be good for metals and metals companies for a very long time.
You know, on some of your comments there, so I'm just going to compartmentalize it. Well, you did mention the Chinese consumption cycle from obviously 2001 to 2011. Many people are saying that this trend you know, when you forecast out the number of vehicles and the things you need to do to get to that carbon neutral future, it's going to be a longer wave. It's not going to be a 5-10 year wave, because you literally need 20 to 25 years before you really can sell 100 million transport vehicles a year in all electric. So they're saying that it's going to be longer in duration than that cycle, and many are saying it's going to be much higher in duration, because beyond the vehicles themselves, you have to rewire countries and grids and, you know, gas stations, etc., to service an industry like that. So I'm just curious your thoughts.
I agree. You said it all. You said it all.
Right? Like, you know, and like the other part of that, you know, many of us in the commodity space, I have the privilege of running a little small commodity broker, but many of us just find it bizarre that in this cycle where people are super excited about Tesla and SPACs on every electric battery configuration or vehicle configuration and charging configuration and carbon capture configuration, yet they don't connect the dots and see that you don't get that future without copper and nickel and cobalt and all of the metals you just described. So do you think they ever will get it?
You know, it's hard to say. I couldn't agree more with you, Bruce. You know, if you take the market capitalization of every single mining company in the world, it rivals kind of, you know, Tesla, or maybe, I'm not sure what it is, but it's a fraction of what the tech stocks are trading. And yet, without metals, the tech stocks would be nowhere. They wouldn't exist without copper and silver and all those metals that are essential to create electricity and make their servers work and make their computers work and so on. But investors forget that. You're right. And I mean, can you imagine so the frustration that I have about that particular situation must be similar to what, you know, Ford and GM and Chrysler and all the other, you know, car companies that are making tens of millions of cars every year, and they watch a company like Tesla skyrocket in value to where it's valued at more than all of them put together, which is just nuts. It's absolutely crazy, but it's the world we live in. It's the world we live in. People like following trends, speculators like following companies they're excited about. Tesla has had it makes beautiful cars. I'm not knocking Tesla. It's a great company with a very visionary leader, but it's crazy that they're not looking at the value proposition in the automobile industry from these other companies, particularly those that are going electric, like Ford is now, and actually GM is, and a lot of the other companies that are out there. That's crazy. So it's just as crazy as an investor buying a Tesla stock instead of a tech or a Freeport or any of the majors, or even down market in any of the base metal majors, which are trading for 4 times EBITDA versus 80 times for Tesla. It's crazy. It's crazy. When without those companies' products, Tesla would be nowhere. It is crazy. The world's crazy.
But I think it's indicative of the stage of the cycle we're in, because there will be a realization point at some point, I think.
Well, there's always going to be a discount. Mining is not everyone's favorite industry to invest in, which is the way it is. They always forget to look at themselves in the mirror and think about, if it can't be grown, it has to be mined. Mining is essential, number one. Number two, modern mining is done very, very well, very much in compliance with high level environmental, social, and governance criteria. It's really done well at the scale that we're working today. Most mines, especially when they're reclaimed, you hardly even know they existed. So people just don't understand that. I mean, they look back 50 years or 100 years to what mining used to be like and all the waste and all the negatives that came out then. And or they look at small mines in small countries that are causing all kinds of, they're unregulated, they cause all kinds of damage, and they should be regulated, but they're not. And so it's a tough world when you have to try to be a champion for an industry that doesn't have a very good reputation. It should have a much better reputation, and maybe it will. And when it does, maybe it'll be more in the limelight. But at the end of the day, what I think most company executives are trying to do is remind people, without these metals being mined responsibly, they would have no technology industry whatsoever today, or any ability for us to decarbonize our world. Some people get it, and a lot of people just don't. They just don't think that far.
Well, there's just a related question that just popped on. What positive action can the mining industry take to clean up its image? And I think you've mentioned a few of them already, but is there anything else that they can do?
Yeah, well, it's hard, because most mining companies are run by geologists, engineers that aren't exactly the world's greatest communicators to the general public. They're people like getting their hands dirty and out in the bush. And we're not public relations experts. So, and people don't make that connection between a lump of coal or a hunk of copper. Let's forget the coal analogy for now. Let's just say a hunk of copper, a hunk of nickel, and their life, and the things that they use in their computers, which are made of metals. They don't make that connection. So it's really hard to say. Industries all have industry associations that do a lot of that work. They liaise with governments, but most importantly, companies just have to do the right thing. They have to be as good environmental stewards as they possibly can, use as little water, create no waste, reclaim their mines well at the end of the mine life, have no accidents, look after their workers' safety, look after the community health, dialogue with the communities, make sure they're doing what the communities hope for them to do to the greatest extent possible. This is just basic business today. It's got to be done. Most companies are doing it awfully well, and there's occasionally the odd one that doesn't. The other, I mean, if I'm going to be on a rant for now, the other problem I think is that that confuses a lot of people is the reality of social media these days. The problem is social media is great. It's a wonderful communications tool. It's a wonderful connection tool and all that. But one of the problems of social media is that it gives every idiot a podium, and every person a podium. It gives them a microphone, and they can put whatever rubbish they want out onto the internet, whether it's true or it's false. And there are some people who would believe it because they just don't have the knowledge, education, or the experience to realize that what they're reading is fundamentally wrong. And if it's written in a way that looks convincing, they believe it. And so it's just a problem we have, that we have all of these armchair experts who don't have a clue what they're talking about, or even worse, they have agendas, like an anti-mining agenda that they spew, and some people believe it, and it's something that never existed 20 years ago. Now, to some degree, it's good. At least social media is also good because it keeps companies honest. I mean, you cannot have anything happening at your mines these days without the whole world knowing about it. 5 seconds after it happens, somebody takes a picture, flips it up on the web. There's a tailing spill. There's a problem somewhere. You've got to deal with it. So companies have to be good communicators. They've got to be real-time communicators, and that's harder. I'd say that's harder. They have to do, but it's more difficult.
Yeah. Listen, I think there's a lot of good in some of it, but it's to your point. The problem is there's a lot of times people with agendas that are not apparent from the tweets or from the posts they make, whether it's working on behalf of short sellers or other things to really do not very pleasant. Yeah. So absolutely. We agree. So Ross, I always have to ask, do you have a favorite commodity in the next 5 or 10 years? So many of them look so bright.
Well, I have to say, in my own career, I've been in this game a long time. I've been in, gold, silver, copper, nickel, uranium, all kinds of metals. I'm at the end of my career now. I'm sort of exiting most of my investments, and I have decided to sort of end my career the same way I started it, with a gold company. So my first company was Equinox Resources back in '85 to '94 when I sold it, and then this one, Equinox Gold, has gone since 2018 now, and we're trying to build a huge company, like really world-class and fast. And so far so good. We produced 600,000 ounces last year, 700 this year. We're on track to produce 1.2 million in a few years. And at that point, it's going to be a really major company. And then I've got a bunch of junior companies that I'm a significant investor in. Lumina Gold is the most important one to me. Lumina Gold is a huge gold copper exploration property in Ecuador that we've been working on for 7 or 8 years now. Luminex, which is a spin-out from Lumina Gold, and a few other gold exploration companies. Those are my gold investments. I still have all the shares that I've had for years and years in the silver company that I used to be founder, CEO, and chairman of, called Pan American Silver. I still have all the shares in those, although I stepped off the board. I'm chair emeritus, but not active in the company anymore. But I love silver. I love silver because it's great in its largest use now is in photovoltaic cells, and it's got hundreds and thousands of other uses in other things. It's a very important part of this electricity transformation. It's a great metal. It's also a precious metal like gold. It has all the upside that the gold has, to the extent that people finally accept the fact that inflation is here to stay and the Fed can't do anything to stop it. That's why gold and silver are great precious metals investments as stores of value, as paper currencies devalue. And then on the other metals, there's a lot to love in things like copper. Copper would be my favorite, I would say, Bruce. Copper is so fundamental, a metal in demand for everything electrical and also everything household, plumbing, wiring, all that stuff. It's just a critical metal, and we need to produce a lot more of it, and mines are going to be harder and harder to feed that demand. So I just think the prospects for copper are terrific. Nickel is going to be okay. I don't have quite the same bullish prospects on nickel. Uranium, it's okay. I just fear that uranium prices are kind of higher than they should be if uranium supply were to be normalized with particularly Saskatchewan uranium production. And then on the demand side, uranium has one demand area, which is electricity making as a utility, and uranium reactors are expensive and they're complicated. They take a long time to permit and build, and renewable energy today is very competitive against that. So I'm sort of thinking demand might be a little bit wobbly, supply could increase. So I'm not wild about uranium in terms of its prospects, but on the fundamental side, it's okay. Zinc is good. Cobalt is okay, but I don't think there's enough cobalt to really have cobalt batteries be standard batteries. Lithium is great, but there's a lot of lithium in the world everywhere, and that's good because the need for lithium is going to increase exponentially in the future. I just don't think the price is going to increase exponentially, and so on and so on. Titanium is great. Vanadium is great. Vanadium is a battery metal and a steel making metal. We've got a big investment in a vanadium company called Strategic Minerals, I think it is, and it's got a huge vanadium project on the bubble, and so, I just think we're in it for a pretty good time right now. It's nice to be in the commodity business. The sun's definitely shining right now, and as long as Ukraine is wobbly, and as long as this great electrification trend, the decarbonization trend that the world's in right now, this great transition that we're happening continues, I think this sun's going to be shining for quite a while. There you have it. There's a lot of metals I like, and a few
No, I think that was very good. I mean, I do agree with you. The thing about copper is that it's a physics thing. It conducts electricity better, other than silver and gold, which are far more expensive. There's not really been a substitute for copper, and in vehicles, there's not another component other than copper and rare earths that go into the magnets to make engines. They haven't made an engine with a different formulation like they do with the batteries. So I definitely I see where you take your point on copper there. You spoke a little bit. I've got a question here on a follow-up. You spoke a little bit about your companies. Question here: can Ross tell us more about Luminex Resources and his vision behind this company?
Sure. So we had a gold discovery in Ecuador in Lumina Gold back in 2015 or 2016, I think. And we spent years drilling that off into something really big, huge, relatively low grade, but right on surface. I think it's 15 million ounces right now in all categories. And We're really trying to follow the Lumina copper model that we started and sold 6 companies in the space of 12 years. And so we wanted to groom Lumina Gold for sale to a major gold producer because it's capable of producing 350,000 ounces a year for over 20 years. So it's a significant deposit. And so we took all the stuff we had in Lumina Gold and we put it in a new spin-out vehicle called Luminex and popped that out into the market a few years ago. We have drilled, we've joint ventured a number of the properties. We've drilled probably 6 or 7. Most of them we have not had luck. I mean, you need luck in this game, but we sure have given it a good go with both our own money and BHP, Anglo American, First Quantum, big companies that have acquired our properties, drilled them, and so far they haven't found, you know, the world-class discovery that'll make Luminex go from 40 cents a share to $4 or $10. That's of course the hope when you're in the exploration game. It's a generative exploration company, and we're generating projects like crazy, and we're drilling some ourselves. We have had some success with a large gold project called Condor, and that's one that they're continuing to work on. So it's well managed, very small, very low, very small market cap, and I think it's really a classic exploration play. If we have success, you're going to see a multiple gain on the stock, and if not, we'll just keep turning stones over, drilling properties, and until we find the big win. Meanwhile, Lumina Gold is completely cleaned up. It's got one project called Cangrejos. We're in the process right now of drilling it again, wrapping it up in a box with a beautiful bow, so we'll be able to sell it off to a major company. I will say we almost did this last year, mid-year. We almost did it. We were just that close from a divestment, and we just got caught in I guess a sea change of what's going on in China, and of course COVID didn't help. But now COVID's over and we're back on track, and we're hoping that company will be divested in the near future.
Well, and one of the things that we are so excited about at Red Cloud that we'd mentioned is that we do think that Ecuador, Ross, and I know that's why you guys went there so many years ago. It's like the modern day Chile with a little bit more overburden, not quite as scarred off, and very undiscovered at this point. Hasn't had the decades and decades of major production mines, and really is the right place to be looking, wouldn't it? Would it not be?
Ecuador is so well mineralized, it's incredible, and it is so underexplored. So what you say is totally correct, although today it's definitely different than when we first started going there in the mid-2010s. You've had a large world-class gold mine that's opened up called Fruta del Norte by Lundin Gold. You've had 2 world-class copper discoveries, one by Sol Gold and one by Solaris Copper, which is run by Richard Wark. We have, I think Equinox Gold has a $300 million stake in that. And that's a fantastic new discovery. So there are new discoveries happening that demonstrate the quality of the Ecuador mineral endowment. The next stage is for those deposits to become mines. And that's going to be a long-term process. But at the end of the day, I think you're going to see some really huge new copper production and gold production coming from Ecuador to rival that which exists in Peru and Chile.
Okay. Is there anything, I always ask this too, you don't need to answer this, Ross, but are there any really spectacular looking resource stories out there, not in the Lumina, Equinox, or Pan American silos of the world that just really have your eye and attention?
There's lots of them. There's always lots of them. You know, there's some exciting gold plays in various places. What Solaris is doing in Ecuador on the Warintza copper deposit is very exciting. That's probably the #1 copper story that I'm following personally. Almost anywhere. I mean, of course, Robert Friedland's Ivanhoe Copper is doing heroic things in Democratic Republic of Congo, but it's not the easiest place to make an investment in. There are uranium discoveries being made in northern Saskatchewan that are fabulous. There's I would say on a scale of 1 to 10 right now, we're maybe at like a 5 on mineral exploration run mostly by juniors And the only reason we're not higher is because there just isn't the amount of money in the game, even though the metal prices are fantastic. You know, you've just seen this divergence between the price of these commodities and the equity prices have sort of remained flat or even down. So it's harder to raise money. It's harder to be aggressive on acquisitions and that kind of thing. That's just where we are right now. There's very few ways to play copper amongst the juniors, or nickel, or zinc, or most of the metals. It's a tougher game. The result of that is that the few companies that do exist will get the investment dollars when they flow. And I think they're starting to flow. You've seen massive commodity price noise this past week with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. I think that's going to bring the whole sector into a higher profile, and it should draw some money into some of these really good stories that are happening today, here and there. But I'll leave it to you and your analysts to tell your clients, you know, the best companies to buy, and I'm sure you've got a whole handful of them.
Well, we appreciate that. Listen, the obvious question for your comment about the divergence between the commodity prices and the stocks is, if they don't capitalize the industry to bring money in to do exploring, doesn't that just mean we have to have higher and higher prices until it does get people's attention? Speaking
Yes.
Economically?
The answer is yes, for sure. For sure. You know, this is basic economics. As the price goes up, the demand goes down and the supply goes up. The problem in the mining industry, demand can go up very quickly, but it takes a long, long time for supply to go up. What took 10 years or 5 or 10 years between discovery and mining production, 25 years ago, today takes 20 years. It just, and often doesn't happen, I mean, it's so perverse what's going on in many parts of the world. We have, Pan American has a silver deposit in the middle of Argentina, in the middle of nowhere. There's no biodiversity to speak of. There's no issues with water. There's no issues with anything. But the government is influenced by a small group of extraordinarily anti-mining, rabid anti-mining individuals, and they've blocked that thing from going ahead. Despite the fact that it'll produce between 500 million and $1 billion of value for the local region every single year for 20 years. I mean, it's crazy. In Serbia, there was a referendum that resulted in the Serbian country blocking a lithium mine that Rio Tinto was going to build in an area that had no problem with, I mean, there would have been no net environmental or social negatives from that mine, but there was this perception of negativism from mine, and Rio Tinto eventually had to walk away. I think they wrote off a couple $2 billion. A lithium mine, that's something that's going to be basic in the electrification of the world, getting us off of our addiction to CO2, fossil fuels. So it is a strange world we live in. We've seen in the States, we've seen Minnesota kind of go off limits to mining. We've seen yesterday, I think Honduras said they were going to ban open pit mining. Well, they can do that all they want, but at the end of the day, if you can't mine, you can't produce metals for a world that needs metals. So where's it going to end? I think you're right. A few companies will be in good places, able to mine, and they'll be trading at ridiculous premium valuations because they're able to do things. I'll tell you one thing. I'm here in Brazil right now. This is a great country to mine in. It is really great. They have strict rules. There have been some horrible disasters in the iron ore business of tailings failures in the last 10 years. So they've just hammered every company on tailings regulations. And the result is, I don't think there's going to be a spill in Brazil for a long, long time. But it's a great country to mine in. It's a real mining country. There, our workforce here, I think we have 3 mines in Brazil. We're going to open up a 4th one in about 2 weeks. And so we have about 3,000 or 4,000 employees here, 100% Brazilian, great people, supportive government. It's a wonderful place to mine. So it's going to be winter. Mexico, I cannot say the same thing about. Mexico's getting more difficult. It was a great place 10 years ago. It is much more difficult today. Same with Peru, same with Chile, same with Argentina, same with Colombia. So, and of course, West Africa has been really great for gold miners. Mali's in a mess, Chad's in a mess, Niger's in a mess, Burkina Faso's in a mess. It's just a tough world. So social difficulties, perceived environmental problems that don't exist, but are perceived to be issues and stopping people from wanting to have a mine in their backyard. All the NIMBYism that exists everywhere. This is the world we live in. And it's a tough game, but again, if you can overcome, I mean, I started Pan American Silver in 1994 to build a world-class silver mining company from nothing. Well, believe me, silver is mainly a byproduct metal, so you don't find very many true silver mines. And when you find one, you know, it's really valuable. So we worked hard, and eventually, after 25 years, we built the second largest silver mining company in the world. So it can be done, but it's difficult. Keep your head down, work hard, tell the truth, you know, do what you say you're going to do. And I think ultimately you'll be successful if you're a mining company developer, and if you're an explorer, stick to what you're good at, exploration. Because ultimately, if you find something big, somebody's going to want to buy it at a crazy premium. That's the outcome, as long as we have an uptrend in metal markets and a good mood in the market. Because when things turn and become a bear market, it's, you know, every ship is left high and dry. You just have to hunker down, get through it. It will turn. It always does. And luckily, that's not the world we're in at this moment.
Ross, just one other side question here from the audience. Appreciate Ross's thoughts on newly created carbon credit companies. Do you have a view on that? Carbon capture?
Yeah, I do.
I'm assuming it's a carbon capture, so I'll let you go.
No, this is carbon. These are carbon credit companies.
Oh, not the
and there's
capture.
one that I am a significant shareholder called Carbon Streaming. It's listed on the NEO exchange, I think, Carbon Streaming. But there's a handful of other companies that are being created right now. And it's very different than the metal streaming game. It's far more complicated, It's harder to secure acquisitions. It's the same kind of business where you get an entity that is sequestering carbon. So it could be a new forest, for example. It could be replanting a forest, or it could be making a park out of an area that was going to be logged. So you're truly sequestering carbon that wouldn't otherwise be sequestered. And then this carbon streaming company or carbon royalty company would be buying those credits that are created that way, and then they're selling those on to a company that wants to go to net zero, of which there's a giant number today. So there's a lot of money in the game, but believe me, the devil's in the details. Some of these companies will be winners and some will be losers. It's a very tough game to prove you've got a real carbon credit, to have it audited, to have it verified, to have it run for years and years and years. So I would say we're still in probably the second or third inning of that game. And in that world, there will be winners and losers. And so buyer beware.
Thanks for that, Ross. Listen, we're running almost into 50 minutes here. I cannot thank you enough on behalf of Red Cloud. It is always an honor and a privilege to have your thoughts at our conferences. We do appreciate it. And thank you again for coming and doing this.
Well, it's my great pleasure. I'd much prefer doing this than being in the hot and wet underground environment here at this point we're in. But I'll go back there in 5 or 10 minutes. And with that, I just want to thank you also for the honor of letting me rant away with opinions that are based on a long life of involvement in the business and all the scars and blood I've got in my brain that result from that.
Well, I can speak on behalf of just about all the people that enjoy your talks, Ross, that we hope you're going to be like Warren Buffett and keep in the game and keep apprised of stuff while you're breathing, because we don't want you to leave the game. There's almost so few of you out there.
Well, I don't want to leave it either too soon, other than on a plan basis.
Understood.
Thank you.
Thanks,
so much.
Ross, and thanks everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.